Handling events in React is actually pretty straightforward. And so let's now learn how it's done. So as you can imagine, we are not going to use the addEventListener method here because that is the imperative way of building UIs. But here in React, we use a more declarative approach. So we do not manually select DOM elements, and so therefore we do also not use addEventListener. Instead, we use something similar to the HTML inline event listener. So instead, in React, we do something very similar to the HTML inline event listener. So basically, we will directly listen for the event right on the element where they will happen. So right here on the button, for example, we can use the onClick prop, and then we simply specify a function here. So the click is the event name, and then we always prefix it with the on, and then we need to write it in camel case. While in inline HTML, we would write it like this. So like this, and then specifying a string. So no camel case, but this is not HTML, it is JSX. And so it's slightly different, just as we learned before in the lecture about the rules on JSX. So again, we will pass in here now a function, and that function will then be executed whenever there is a click happening on this DOM element. So in this case, on this button right here. So let's create a quick arrow function here. And all I'm going to do now is to alert something. Let's say previous. And this should already be working. So if I click here now, then yes, we get the alert that is saying previous. And we can do the same thing on the other button. And here we say next. And so of course, then here we will get a different message. And that's essentially it. So this is how we handle events the React way. No addEventListeners, but instead we specify an event listener function directly on the element using, in this case, the onClick prop. But it could be any other event as well. So we can specify another event handler. So let's use the onMouse enter. And so now here again, we need to specify a function. And it's really, really important to understand that it is not a function call, but really a function. So we cannot simply write alert test, for example, because watch what happens now as I save. So you see, immediately we got this test right here, and not when I hover over the button. So why is that? Well, basically, as soon as React initializes this component, so when it first calls this app function, it will then see this code. And so here we are calling alert. And so then that's exactly what it does. React will read this code, and then here it finds this function call. And so it will immediately call this function. But again, that's not what we want. We want to basically define a callback function, which will be called at a later time. And that later time is in this case when the mouse enters this element. So you see that now nothing happened, but as soon as the mouse hovers here, then this function is called. So this function is called, and then we get our alert. So again, very, very important. Do not call a function here, but really specify a function value. Somehow we got that again here, but never mind. So this was just a test anyway. Let's get rid of this. This was just to show you that we can listen, of course, to more than just the click event. Now, usually we do not directly define the event handler function right here in the onClick prop, but instead we create a separate function and then pass that function in here. So let's do that now. And so usually we create those event handler functions right here in the component. So that's something new that we haven't done before, but that's perfectly fine. We can define any functions that we want here right inside the component body. And let's call this one handle previous. And this handle part here in the event handler function is pretty standard in React development. So you will see this all the time. And so then you know immediately that this function is an event handler function that is probably being used somewhere in the JSX of that component. In this case, it's going to be used right here. So handle previous. And what we want to do here, again, for now, is just to alert previous. So if we click here now, that's going to work still. Great. And once again, really, really important to notice that here we are just passing in the function value. So we are not calling it, because if we were calling it, then again, we would immediately see that previous. So React would then immediately run this code here as it sees it. All right. But like this, we are only passing in the function. Or of course, we could also do this. But of course, that's very redundant. So now we are back to just having a function here, right? It's just a function that calls another one. So that's not very effective, but sometimes we will have to do something similar. But for now, this is the way that makes sense. And so let's now quickly create another one. So again, this is usually the way we do it. So creating a function which starts with handle, and then we simply pass that function here into the onClick prop or any other prop that we can use to handle some other event. All right, just to make sure that it works, and indeed it does. Great. So this is how we handle events typically in React. But of course, now we actually want something meaningful to happen here. And in particular, we want to basically change this step value here, right? And for that, we need something called state. Now we have touched on state many times already, but now it's time to really learn what state is and then how we can use it in practice.